Welcome back, everyone. In September of this year, the Joint Staff released the long-awaited joint publication 3-04, Information in Joint Operations. The joint doctrine enables information as a joint function to, quote, assure, deter, compel, and force relevant actor behaviors that support U.S. interests. And that's from the executive summary page 7. This doctrine emphasizes the requirement to incorporate information as a foundational element during planning and during the conduct of all operations. So we assembled a panel to examine, through the lens of special operations, the effect of this joint doctrine's evolution from information operations to information advantage. Moderating the panel this morning is Dr. Juan Garcia, one of our JSOU faculty leads for the Integrated Program of Study for Strategic Influence and Information Advantage. He also serves as a colonel in the United States Army Reserves, assigned to the Joint Staff J7, where he's involved also in this same field of study. Dr. Garcia, welcome to the forum, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Doug. As Doug mentioned, so today's information environment is characterized by pervasive on-demand media and social hyperconnectivity. Recognizing the challenges faced by the DoD from both state and non-state actors, we've had an evolution in strategy and doctrine. So first, with the publication of DoD Strategy for Operations in the Information Environment, 2016, followed by Secretary Mattis designating information as a joint warfighting function in 2017, and now where they looked at how to build information into operations art, to design operations that deliberately leverage informational aspects of military activities. Most recently with JP 304, Information in Joint Operations, it's a doctrinal guide for the integration of information and defining information advantage as the operational advantage gained through the joint forces' use of information for decision-making and its ability to leverage information to create effects in the information environment. The application of informational power is not new to SOF, right? It's inherent in multiple special operations core activities, including civil affairs, MISO, and others. But today, the application of full informational power requires a planned application of other information-related capabilities in an integrated fashion, along with capabilities resident in other warfighting functions. I'm honored today to moderate this next panel on what effect does joint doctrine's evolution to information advantage from IO to information advantage have on SOF. With me in order are Mr. John Markham, Deputy J39 at the United States Special Operations Command, Mr. Bryan Sparling, Information Warfare Advisor with the U.S. Army Cyber Command, and Mr. John Renda, Army Special Operations Program Manager at the Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory. As with the other panels, each panelist will represent their perspectives. We'll open it up to Q&A, and I'd like to remind the audience to please use the hashtag Q as you put your questions forward. With that, I'll turn the floor over to John Markham. John?
Hey, let me start by saying thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to come and participate in this, and just watching some of the other presentations, it's really incredibly worthwhile. So I hope I can make a small contribution to this forum. And so anyway, something about me. I've been in this business primarily as a psychological operations professional since about 1992. Kind of cut my teeth on Operation Restore Hope in Somalia, and then finished up my uniform career as the Information Operations Division Chief at SOCCENT from 2001 to 2005. As far as the doctrine piece here, I'm going to not spend a huge amount of time talking about that, and I think I've got a couple other panel members who are actually more up on the doctrine than I am. But I do want to say that I think we're in a period which I would describe as almost like doctrinal competition, where if you look at 3-4 and then the other things that the services are doing and writing about in their doctrine and in other publications, as well as some of the joint concepts, like the joint concept from information advantage that came out last year and was supposed to have had a follow-on iteration by now, but has not. There's just a lot of churn. And in this business, it's always been difficult in terms of, and General Agata spoke to this quite eloquently in terms of, our ability to communicate properly because people don't understand the terms we have and the definitions we have the same way, not just within DoD, but also between other agencies. So I think the good news is that with the publication of 3.4, that some of that will start to get ironed out now that there is a joint pub that is no kidding been promulgated, that will start hopefully to have some things fall in line. So what I want to spend the majority of my time talking about here is how do we get after this? And in my mind, and this also follows with a lot of other people have been talking about. When I look across, in particular, DoD, and I'm going to take a DoD perspective here, a lot of great initiatives and efforts to sort of get after this. We've got the Information Warfare Center up at Fort Bragg. We've got the Joint Information Operations, the Joint Web Ops Center here in Tampa. And then if you look in the theaters, you'll see information warfare task forces. You'll see different components, the service components of the commands in the theaters, doing certain things. You've got CYBERCOM, who is big on trying to do MISO in particular as part of their operations. And these are all great, and everybody's trying to there's a lot of understanding, I think, across the board in terms of the importance of it. And people are trying to do something to make a difference in this area. So what I think is missing is that we haven't, as DoD, sat down and figured out, what is it that we need to do to excel at this. Again, as General Nagata said, we should be at the forefront. You would think that as the United States that we would be in the lead on this, but in particular in DoD, we're not. And he's talked to some of the reasons why. But we at some point we need to figure out, what is it that we should be able to do in DoD, and how does that fit in with what the rest of government's doing? And I think we start by thinking of what the attributes of an organization or a capability, would be, and not just the attributes of the organization, but of the operations themselves. And again, he sort of stole some of my thunder, because one of the first things I want to talk about is, persistence. I think if you're really going to sort of own and understand our adversaries' narratives and their operations, and be able to conduct your own operations in such a way that you're competitive, if not dominant, and then also react when appropriate to things that they're doing. I mean, you have to have, the unblinking eye, if you will, for the information environment, and that is a persistent 24/7 capability, that supports the theater commanders. And there's, we can talk all day about the different ways that you might organize that, but that's one thing. I don't think. I think there's certain parts of this activity that can be done TDY in return, with forces, from Fort Bragg and elsewhere coming into the theater, doing specific things and coming out. But I think you've got to have a core activity that is just always there, always on, and has long-term, people on tours and or employees or contractors, whatever. Second thing I'll talk about is it's got to be horizontally and vertically integrated. And by that, I mean several things. There needs to be a better connection from the strategic to the tactical activities that are going on. They need to be better connected, so that, if people are off doing their own things, and I think, again, General Nagata described that perfectly. We're either crossing or diverging, creating conflicts or gaps and friction. My analogy is if you're, just have a lot of people all throwing stones into the lake, the ripples are going to cancel each other out, if it's not an organized effort in some way. So those things have to be better integrated. And then you have to have that integration with your partners, with other theaters, with other agencies. I was kind of heartened actually yesterday, listened to the PACOM guys talk. It sounds like they're getting after a lot of those things in their theater. And I thought that was really good. But again, I think if I, didn't have a chance to ask him, but I think they could use more resources. They could use an organization that really is focused on this from a full-time job, if you will, to go after that kind of stuff. And I think we need a place, an organization where partners and others can plug into, and then, create that network. And that's the next point, is it needs to be networked and collaborative. So in a conversation we had not that long ago, I was talking with someone and they said, hey, we need more expertise, on these kinds of, or this adversary or this audience. And the comment was, hey, there's a group in the Pentagon that focuses on this. And so when you look around the government and DoD, there's a huge amount of capability and expertise that can be brought to bear on operations in the information environment that are not. And the reason is they're just not connected or not networked. So I think, part of this design, if you will, is figuring out where all those other appropriately supporting capabilities are, and then how do you tie them together? How do you, harness them so that everybody's sort of on the same page, and that the practitioners who are responsible for this can tap into those experts and that capability when they need it. I think there's a lack of skill training and tradecraft schools for the people that do this. I'll just leave that at that. And I think the last thing here is, connected to the last is, whatever we design needs to be an evolving and learning organization that is, keeping up with the technology and the other things as they change, because it's a constantly changing environment. So, and the last piece of that in terms of an attribute is it's got to be resourced. In our experience here, if you look under the hood of the Joint MISO Web Ops Center, you'll find a lot of what I just talked about in there in the design, but they still have not, received the billets and the people for those billets. And I could go into a long, vignette about how not well received that requirement was when it came up for the Joint Manpower Validation Board at the Joint Staff. The bottom line is, if we're going to say we're going to do this, we should provide at least the resources required to get after it. They're doing great with what they have. But from my perspective, if you looked at the mill civ requirements for that organization, it's about 250 people. So for one company's worth of military and civilian billets would have created a global capability in terms of, at least for web ops, to go after some of this stuff. And yet we couldn't even do that. I'll finish up with just talking about, what we ought to be able to do with that organization. The number one thing is create understanding. Because if we don't understand our adversaries and our narratives, I heard some of this yesterday from the PACOM guys, so I think everybody gets that. You can't act appropriately if you really don't understand, what your actions are going to do, given the cultural and all the other aspects of it. And people have already talked the narrative, so I'll skip over that. And last but not least, the number one requirement is that we establish the audiences that we need for competition and hopefully not conflict, and that we create credibility with those audiences, so that when the real need is there to communicate and ask for those things, as General Nagata said, there's a relationship, even when you're talking mass audiences, that they will react appropriately. And I'll stop there. I'm a little bit over time, I think. So,
John, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. With that, we'll turn it over to Bryan Sparling. Bryan, the floor is yours.
There you go. Need to unmute. Appreciate the opportunity to speak today and to be on this panel with a couple of great experts. And this has been a fantastic event. Credit to Ike and the team, and Doug, the team at JSOU. Done a great job putting this together, and it's been very impressive. So there you go. And I'm gonna hit these points, but not as deeply. I'm gonna try to underline some things that have been said over the last 24 hours and connect some points together and not reiterate some other points. So first of all, I work for, and I have for the last 4 years, worked for U.S. Army Cyber Command as their information warfare advisor to the commander and the staff and that large organization. In that role, I've been directly engaged with Department of the Army and TRADOC, Combined Arms Center, in the development of our new information advantage doctrine, and within Army Cyber in its joint mission in support of U.S. Cyber Command in expanding the way they look at cyber operations away from just, bricking boxes, the equivalent of, inflicting violence in cyberspace, and over to more influence-based operations, and they're growing in that realm. So as has kind of been alluded to, I just want to highlight, so what first big point has been hit on, but I want to talk about it a little bit differently, and that's joint command and control complexity. In the beginning, if the beginning's 1945, we had the GCCs, and they are the military lead for all U.S. military operations in their area of responsibility. And as such, they're responsible for the entirety of the U.S. instrument of military power, to include ultimately the political effects, the informational and political effects, the ultimate effects that are achieved in each of those countries. And they work directly with the ambassadors and the country teams in a myriad of organizations. It's a very difficult job, and they're pretty good at doing current operations. When there's a good old-fashioned war on, the GCCs will work very well for focusing violence within a designated joint operations area, within a designated ROE. In peacetime, in the rest of the AOR, which goes on even when you have a war somewhere in the AO, that relationship is more challenging, and it's more challenging specifically to get the services who get the money to do what the GCC wants them to do in terms of shaping the theater. So it's not on my slide. I spent my last 10 years in uniform in joint commands, and I learned one huge lesson, and that is the services get the money. Defense Reform Act of 1986 established reinforced civilian control of the military and the role of the geographic combatant commands, but the services still get $180 billion a year, and they get to decide how they shape forces and develop force structure for the future of land, air, sea, now space, and now this FY, cyberspace, who will soon get their own MFP Type 11 funding, if you didn't know about that, direct to U.S. Cyber Command. So one of the challenges of GCC has been the relationship with the TSOC and with SOF. It's my observation that after 9/11 and the increased resources that flowed to SOCOM, there's been increasing autonomy within the SOF community to operate more independently in independent SOF areas of operation under direct authorities from the National Command Authority in many cases. So the ability to synchronize and coordinate between the GCC and SOF has gotten more complex since 9/11. Well, fast forward about 10 years, and while we were off in the desert in Iraq and Afghanistan doing counterterrorism and coin operations, this other thing happened, which is 500 million people a year join the internet. And by 2000, by now, we have about 6. Last week, by the way, we hit 8 billion sapiens on the planet. 6 of them, a full 3/4, are online. 500 million of them have still never made a phone call. So, but we have a new global information environment, and the physical infrastructure that we refer to in the military as the cyberspace domain. And the cyberspace domain has grown its own military forces, starting with U.S. Cyber Command, and then directed their establishment in each of the services. I highlight that because it's the first time in U.S. military history that we have not had bottom-up force development. We've actually had top-down force development. And the cyber force is inherently joint. There's no question about the fact that General Nakasone is in firm control of all cyberspace activities, and that chain of command is very direct and very well established. So there's a new challenge now. Now GCCs have to coordinate with SOF as they have needed to before, and all this is in addition to the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps. But now they have a third pole, if you will, and that is cyberspace. Now they have an element there now called the Cyber Operations Integrated Planning element that is a staff of about 30 to 50 people that is actually assigned to U.S. Cyber Command and forward positioned at the GCC, and they're specifically there to integrate targeting and effects into the combatant commander's campaign plan. But for those of you that work in this world and have any familiarity with it, you will know that coordination line is tenuous and doesn't always operate effectively. And we're dealing with two communities that don't understand themselves very well. I'll say a last thing I'll add here is that space is coming too. We've now made space its own service underneath the Department of the Air Force. And they are increasing their capacities in theater. So that's the big thing. Joint command and control, complexity. How do you get after complexity? You get after it with terminology and shared understanding. I'm not going to show my other slide because it's already been said, but go back. But I'll just say we are, in the last 4 years, I would argue, going backwards in terms of terminology. Yes, information was declared a joint function and 7 years ago, 2017. The Army has twice since decided that they will not follow suit. At the 4-star level, have decided explicitly that they will not make information a warfighting function within the Army. They have alternatively decided to pursue a doctrine of information advantage and use that to replace the former doctrine of information operations. Meanwhile, at the joint level, we've moved not to an information advantage as our overall construct replacing IO. We've moved to the concept of operations in the information environment, paired together with information as a joint function. The joint world has the term information advantage in the doctrine, and they're developing a joint concept for information advantage version 2.0 that Tom Evans mentioned. However, it is a completely different construct than the Army construct. So you have to be versed in the Army construct and the joint construct and all the service constructs, because some of them are using the term information warfare. Everybody's using different terminology, which, as Tom pointed out, is difficult. The challenge, I would say, in all this is, how do we get out of it, and where does all this come from? And I just want to, my thinking about this over the last 20 years comes down to what I'd call culture, American warfighting culture. There is an American way of war. Russ, most of you were issued this book at the Staff College, whether you read it or not and still have it, go find it. That we have a preference for violence. It's much more like the Clausewitz did a great job of explaining it, and that way of war. And I would contend that what we are dealing with our adversaries in China and Russia is more a Sun Tzu, more Occidental way of war, which is the acme of skill in which is to win without fighting. And I would offer, for those of you who've worn at least the U.S. Army uniform and other uniforms, deep in our bones, the U.S. Army is not interested in winning without fighting. It's interested in fighting, and it represents our culture. We play football, F-O-O-T-B-A-L-L, not F-U-T-B-O-L, as is being played over there, an indirect game that can end in 0-0 ties, and people still think it's a great competition. We want to fight and we want to win, and it's part of who we are. I just want to say this is not necessarily a bad thing. And Eliot Cohen, many of you will know him at SAIC, written some books on this. Here's one he wrote to complement Russ Weigley's book. Can't get it in front of the camera. It's called Conquered into Liberty. And he highlights the paradox of the American way of war, stemming all the way back to the 7 Years' War, and even before a revolutionary conflict. We like to talk peace, but we figure out a way to get into a fight every 20 years. Robert Kagan wrote about that in his great book, Dangerous Nation. We say one thing and we do another. So the last point, I just want to circle back to Matt Armstrong's opening point and the danger of the militarization of diplomacy. Our country continues to pump resources into the Defense Department, just like President Eisenhower warned about a vast military industrial complex, and we grow the strength of the DoD. Secretary Gates famously tried to get more resources sent to the State Department under Secretary Clinton. It didn't work. The State Department has a culture of diplomacy, and I would argue that they are playing what James Carse and Simon Sinek have called an infinite game. An infinite game is a game in which everybody plays to continue playing so that everyone can continue playing. And we in the Defense Department are playing a finite game. And the purpose of a finite game is to have a winner and a loser. Our paradox in the United States is that we continue to give resources to the fighters. There's something to be said about letting the writers do the writing and the fighters do the fighting. So how do we deal with our own culture and find a way? I agree with General Nagata that we need to find military authorities and capabilities to counter in the gray space. However, we are asking, I just offer a counter narrative and say, We are fundamentally asking people to do something that is counter to their ethos and their culture. Here we are in the special operations community. We are not in the conventional community, and it's to the conventional community that the preponderance of resources will continue to flow. We do not have a resource problem. The U.S. military, by definition, that spends 5 times more than the next 5 people on the planet, can never say that it has a resource problem. Just by definition, we have a priorities problem. We simply do not prioritize the capabilities that we've been talking about in this forum for the last 24 hours. So how is that a feature or a bug? In this community, it's a bug. In others, they think we're doing just fine. I can't tell where I'm at on time, but I'll stop there.
Thank you, Bryan. Really appreciate that. With that, I'll turn it over to our last panelist, John Renda. John, the floor is yours.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Thanks to JSOU for the opportunity. So quickly on my background, I was a career psychological operations officer. Of note, I got to serve as the 75th Ranger Regiment Information Operations Officer and was able to do that from 2001 to 2004, and got exposed to full integration of the IRCs in support of trying to dominate the information environment. And then also finished up my career up on the NSC staff as a director for strategic communications. Currently serving at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab as a program manager for Army Special Operations, but with a unique focus on information operations capability development. So based on my background, I'm going to try to focus my remarks on technology and how it relates to the integration, convergence of IRCs to support dominance in the information environment. And then time permitting, I'll try to give some perspectives on whole of government view of DoD ops in the information environment. So beginning with technology, I'll start with the convergence of cyber, electronic warfare, PSYOP, MILDEC, and signals intelligence. So what we're seeing in this SEMA spectrum, to include RF, is the creation of technical capabilities that simultaneously receive and transmit, to include having a flexible, adaptable, functional application layer on these technologies, which allows for a variety of workflows, guided executions that can cross from signals intelligence to transmit of jamming, to transmit of waveforms, to introduction of messages, et cetera. So how does SOCOM, and this will be kind of a common theme, how does SOCOM, primarily for the soft service components, USSOC, NavSpecWar, AVSOC, MARSOC, how does SOCOM take ownership of that, take cognizance of it, and develop technologies and address the train, organize, and equip downstream implications of this type of advance in technology? Another concept in this SEMA EW arena is how can SOCOM better advance SOF ability to feed targeting based on RF sensing. A lot of the SOF targeting has been based on ISR platforms and terminal guidance operations. How do we create low swap, tactical RF sensing network capability that can add RF targeting into the fires cycle? And then finally, military deception and its blending with electronic warfare to ensure battlefield survivability for the force. As we pivot to GPC, as everybody's seeing in the Ukraine, like being able to understand your electronic signature, mask it, dissimulate it, will be critical to survivability, success for operations in the info environment. Okay, moving to advanced data analytics and graph-based visualization, another kind of common core technology area that is, when leveraged properly, can be tailored to support traditional J2 intelligence for finding and fixing, counterintelligence requirements to understand our own signatures, a new focus on acquisition threat intel and how our capability development is being targeted for intelligence collection. Obviously, these capabilities, data analytics, graph-based visualization, apply to precision influence, target audience analysis for psychological operations, the ability to identify synthetically generated content, disinformation, and even IP infrastructure analysis for cyber and PSYOP activities. So again, how does SOCOM take cognizance of this common core technology with a view towards posturing the force for dominating the information environment? It calls for federated programs with access to data, federated access to that data, the ability to enrich it, fuse it with other data sources, and have a flexible analytic and visualization layer that J2, J3IO, cyber can all take advantage for their purposes, and then be able to take that up into a classified level and coordinate ops and measures of effectiveness. Another technology area where we see common applications in the information environment, and this is a research and development term, virtual persona operations. So the ability to create presence online and the recognition that this must be able, the force must be able to do this from a precise, bespoke, highly survivable end of the spectrum up to being able to operate at a massive scale, less survivable. Again, how does the force take advantage of this common technology area to train, organize, and equip the force to be successful in this arena? Moving to a dominant theme in our engagement with the SOCOM community, counter UTS and identity management, countering ubiquitous technical surveillance. Obviously employed by great powers, but also employed by great powers through through other nations where we have strong equities. So, in that arena, there are clearly technologies that are being worked on to try to promote force protection, counter, threat intel, but there needs to be a more holistic understanding of, in particular, threat capabilities in this arena to achieve a more holistic approach. And I wanted to bring up this counter UTS challenge because I think it pertains to one of SOF's critical roles for supporting this joint concept of ops in the information environment. And that is, again, kind of a term that we use, SOF, last mile access and placement, in support of cyber and other activities. So, our ability to overcome this UTS challenge enables increased SOF relevance in this last mile access as it applies to cyber and space, this triad. What we're seeing in the last mile arena is, again, requirement for standardized, ruggedized kit for the service component SOF community to bring that capability more strongly into their capability set as a real arrow in the quiver for the joint Cyber and Space Force. One of the challenges for SOCOM is that they, to a large degree, lack formal acquisition pipelines for a lot of these capability areas. So as SOF AT&L evolves and begins to take stock of service component, electronic warfare, cyber, organic requirements, and nesting those with the joint force, hopefully that will evolve. Just quickly on the National Security Council front, clearly our National Security Council, National Command Authorities are not geared for whole of government ops in the info environment. And simultaneously, they're weary of DoD having a heavy hand, particularly in the cognitive domain where we get into messaging. Having said that, there are clear paths for DoD to be more effective in contributing to whole of government embrace of ops in the information environment. And a lot of that is, through enabling access to our technical capabilities, enabling access to information for populations in semi-permissive and denied populations like we're seeing in Ukraine, how our intelligence capabilities can support whole of government release as appropriate for strategic impact. And then on the PSYOP side, detailed target audience analysis and the development of plans and programs that the whole of government can take advantage of for execution. We have the rigor, the staff depth, the analytic capabilities to create plans that could be executed at a whole of government level. And one final note, with all of the evolution with Joint Pub 3.04, ops in the information environment, joint warfighting function, I would still come back to identify that one of the core tenets of these ops is to influence human behavior. And the Psychological Operations Force has, in my mind, the unique target audience analysis and behavior science foundation to add that critical component to this ops in the information environment across the IRCs. All right, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it. So, gentlemen, we're going to open it up for a couple of questions that we've gotten through the chat. First one, and John, this was directed to you, but I'm, of course, bringing it up to the broader panel, is what are your thoughts about, as they say, beefing up warfighter resources for regional expertise and sociocultural knowledge in, schooling, institutional training?
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely. I think there are, if you struggled with this business for any time, I mean, you end up learning a lot of things by struggling with trying to solve the problems and do the missions. But looking back, I mean, when I look at the SF community and other communities, there's a whole series of skill sets which are reflected in courses available to these people, as they come through their careers. And I don't think we've developed that properly for the information warriors, if you will. I think we've got the basic PSYOP qualification course, and then and I think to a large extent there's a few other things out there, but there's MILDEC and other things. But in terms of other types of, I think, tradecraft skills and things that we could benefit from in terms of bringing people along for their careers and developing them, that we really haven't thought through that and put that in place in a big way. So I'll leave it at that since we're got only 10 minutes left. So.
Okay, thank you. Brian, John, Renda, any comments?
Yeah, I definitely have comments, and I just underline what I said before about, I'm all for bolstering resources, regional expertise. I'm all for increasing resources in all military information related capabilities. The question is, how do you do that? And there are only 5 people get money in the DoD. Secretary of Defense gets a few $1 billion to run the defense agencies. Secretary of the Army, Secretary of the Navy, Secretary of the Air Force. Anybody know who the 5th one is? It's your boss, the commander of USSOCOM, who has Title 10 like authorities. And soon General Nakasone will have some money at Cyber Command. But the preponderance of the money goes to the large conventional forces. And when you bring in these types of unconventional resource requirements into the building, they don't compete well in big service budget processes. It's because those are controlled by conventional fighters. So we either got to make the conventional guys think more unconventionally. General Nakasone said, or General Nagata said, it's about how we think. That's exactly right. It's about how we think, and they don't think that way. So is it possible to change the way they think? Or do we need to, continue to pump resources through other venues like SOCOM, like CENTCOM? So I'm sorry, CYBERCOM.
Hey, just one quick comment. I couldn't agree more with how critical this is. And, the atrophy of that strategic studies division down at USSOC, really challenged some of our ability to gain attention at the whole of government level, just having those subject matter experts. I would also add that integrating data analytics into their tradecraft should be considered if this is pursued. Like, how do you bring that anthropology, socio-political expertise? How do you merge that with advanced data analytics to get it to another step?
Okay, thank you. Next question we have here is from one of the, from the audience is, in product development, they know, one method of developing products is taking user input, right, during the design and development process. And he's asking, what are your thoughts about, as we develop new capabilities, technologies, looking beyond just the product specifications and having sort of input from the bottom up?
What does that mean, input from the bottom up?
So, and again, usability, right? So making sure the usability is there as the product is being developed.
So just, I've been in this trade space for a while. So at JSOC, that is the model, right? And how the rest of SOCOM embraces that should be strongly considered. There's not a requirement that doesn't, if it's not validated by an operational unit, it's not getting executed. So how do you extend that to the service components and to ops in the information environment?
As I think we've built some of that into the Web Ops Center. They've got a science and technology branch that I talked about briefly in my pitch. And they work closely with the combatant command and the other teams that are in there to make sure that those people that are working online have the tools that they need to work for them. So I think, when we talk about designing a capability or an organization that can do a better job of going after this and make us more dominant in this space, that's definitely got to be part of the equation.
One last question. So earlier today, and yesterday also, we talked about risk, right? And in the larger military context, given your gentlemen's experience, both at GCC's policy level, the NSC, how can we be more persuasive in the Beltway to be seeking to be less risk averse, to make sure they're less risk averse and we can engage in more risk as we operate?
Well, I'm not sure exactly how we fix the problem, but to admire the problem a little bit. I mean, I think what we are continuing to witness is as complexity increases in the information environment, because we have wired the planet with a new nervous system, that we can, you have the potential for any small tactical item anywhere to have an outsized strategic effect someplace else. And the result of that has been to withdraw authorities from the operational force. Okay, so in the conflict in Ukraine, visual release by the PAO and even messaging authority was completely withdrawn from UCOM, and all that stuff was brought all the way back up to the West Wing. I mean, all messaging is I think it still is being controlled by there. So the process of having a coherent, policy decision, this is our position, promulgated through PCs and DCs, that turns into defense planning guidance through the chairman down through that develops campaign plans, all that. None of that's working in this current conflict. We're playing jazz, and in the National Command Authority themselves, Jake Sullivan and the president are directing individual actions in both communicative and physical, as this thing unfolds. And I would say and so that is by its nature, risk averse. You don't know what the implications are going to be. And I don't know how we fix that, but I will say one final thing that is, I think our fundamental challenge right now, and Ms. Field really talked to this from a soft lens, is to redefine the appropriate role of military force in the 21st century. How does the military instrument of power provide capability? So that's our job, is to advise policy advisors on the judicious and effective use of military force, so that they can make decisions about the application of that force, and that now includes cyber and space capabilities along with that. So and who goes into and does that? It's conventional warfighters. So soft guys have to tell a compelling story to the conventional guys so they can get their capabilities resourced. You have to develop feasible, acceptable, suitable CONOPS, and they have to be synchronized and integrated through the geographic combatant command. And it's hard. It takes a lot of hard work. And all that has to be brought to the National Command Authority. Okay.
Hey, John, let me throw in one thing on risk from a technical perspective. So how can we better model operations in the information environment, just like we're able to model kinetic activities? Obviously, there's huge challenges, but we need to do better at being able to model so we can show not only a national command authority, but a JTF commander, a JSOF commander, a unit commander. I've done due diligence. I've modeled this. Here's what the model says. Here's how we can contain risk. Being able to pull that thread, I think would help to some degree address this risk.
And then I'll come back to you,
I'll
Brian.
make mine a 20-second here. I just pile on and say, hey, a lot of this gets down to individuals, and leadership. So we've had different people come through the process who absolutely were like, hey, we need to be after this. We need to be doing this. And as people rotate and change, the risk calculation changes. So I think if you look at this from a long arc of where we were 20 years ago to how much people are stressing the importance of information now and the doctrine that's coming out, I think it's clear that there is progress when you take that long view. And I think the crop of leaders that is in the pipeline now, as they come up to the senior levels and into those policy positions at OS, et cetera, I think we're going to get better over time. I think people realize that we need to be doing this, and that the risk, in many cases, I think has been overstated.
Okay, Brian, last words.
Yeah, Ollie, I want to just a couple of things John Renda said about, he made the point that the purpose of all this influency stuff and of all military operations is to change human behavior. War is an active force to compel our enemy to do our will, make them do what we want to do. It's questionable whether you can accurately enough. We're dealing with humans, and so we can't necessarily always model them effectively enough to know what we're getting. So you got to stay engaged, and this is where SOF is very effective, as General Magada said. We're out of time. Thanks.
All right. I'd like to thank everyone for their time, for a very informative panel. I'd like to thank the audience for your great questions. With that, we end the panel. Doug, over to you.
So this brings the morning session to a close. I'd like to thank Dr. Garcia and all of the panelists, John Markham, Bryan Sparling, and John Renda, for spending some time with us and giving us their observations.